going to be more washed out when I have these pictures pulled up. That's okay.
Yeah, you have like anime eyes where like it's just like glare in the glasses.
Yeah. Welcome to the Bro Workers podcast. I'm Elliot, and I'm joined, as always, by brother Benji. Say hi.
Hi.
So yeah, today we've kind of picked a topic that I think is the most crucial for jumping into learning how to record and make music on your own, which is basically an overview of recording and sound waves and how they work and how to get them into your system. How to capture those magical vibes in the air and turn them into magical numbers on the computer. So that's basically what we're looking at today. But before we get into all that mumbo jumbo, Benji, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Finally, getting let unsick.
Le unsick. Is that French?
Less let unsick. Yeah, it's a tasty treat. Anyway, but yeah, so that is good. Going to see Nathan after we are done recording to hang out, and yeah, big things for 2025. I'll say it again.
Yeah, it's a big year.
Yeah, some opportunities are arising, and I'm excited for them, and I will keep you guys in the loop about what happens whenever it happens.
Awesome. Optimally vague.
Yes.
Solid.
How are you?
Cool. I'm doing all right. Yeah. I'm staying on the positive. I'm rediscovering the joy of, work or, putting effort into things and sacrificing the pleasures of the moment for the future of yourself and those around you. That's work. Although I do find a lot of the stuff I've been doing like a lot of fun and fulfilling and good.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it feels good to do a good job at things. And I think that's part of why, I enjoy it. So yeah, there you go. Little philosophy. Yeah, things are going all right. I feel like I'm also on like a sickness bender. Like for the last month, maybe. I don't know, maybe if it's allergies. It's
allergic to the flu.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe I have a sinus infection. I don't know. But it's okay. We're doing all right at this moment. It's not too bad. Yeah. I don't know. I don't think there's a lot else going on that I can think of. But yeah, any other interesting side notes from you?
No, I will say that my next topic is going to tie into, or at least I think it might tie into this topic a little bit. So it like not like completely because it's not the same, but it's going to be like a different aspect of it, I guess. So
okay. Yeah, I expect a lot of overlap, and I think noting, like the um overlaps or callbacks to like other episodes or other topics we've talked about is like a good thing. Kind of like, hey, remember this concept? Um, it also appears here, or like it kind of relates to what we're talking about here. So I think trying to make a link in, I don't know, your web of understanding of an area, like make the links together. I think that's a valuable thing for learning,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. I think so
So
too.
that's exciting.
Um,
And also like we could keep a congruent, no, a continuous kind of stream of connection.
yeah, I think that'd be good.
Yeah. Um very nice. That's cool. Any other teasers you'll say about that topic coming up?
I have taught this thing before, and I did it for physics class. Um, so there's going to be a little bit of
Oh.
physics involved with this next
Okay.
topic on next Saturday.
Okay. I hmm. Okay. Interesting. We might
That's
cover
all
some
I.
physics, but I'm not
Okay,
going to go deep
cool.
into like, I don't know, harmonic type stuff, but just how sound waves propagate, how they move. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, okay. Well, cool. I'd say that's it. That's a good note to kind of jump in the topic on. So we're looking at the overview of recording, and um, a good starting place is looking at the AI overview that Google provided me. Um,
Gemini.
those are pretty nifty as long as they don't reference bad sources. I'd take it, which is it's always possible, but
Yeah.
they do pretty good. They do pretty good giving like a summary um, of an idea or of a topic. So basically, let me go through kind of this definition of recording sound. So a microphone converts incoming sound waves into electrical signals by vibrating a diaphragm, which are then captured and stored in a recording medium like a computer hard drive or tape. Um, so yeah, it's a pretty like good overview, kind of simplified down into like the main key components and actions taking place. So, um, so digging in just a little deeper on what each of these means. Sound waves are basically sound travels by changes in pressure, and you can kind of think of it as particles undulating back and forth in parallel to the direction that the sound is traveling, parallel and anti-parallel because it's back and forth. Um, and so that vibrates the microphone diaphragm. The diaphragm has a sort of force transducer or something, which basically takes like a movement, turns it into like translates it into an electrical signal. That electrical signal is sent to like a digital converter, like an analog to digital converter. And then um, that converts that continuous signal into a discrete signal. It's basically a number in some range of numbers to represent the amplitude of that sound wave. Um, and then at a given moment. And then that is saved down in your computer on your hard drive. I think we'll kind of focus our attention to um, kind of computer recording. Tape recording's a little antiquated, though. Some people still like it for style, style
Hmm.
points. Or I use a tape recorder for what's called tape delay sometimes, and that's another cool thing we'll talk about someday. So yeah, that's kind of the rundown of the basics of what's happening when you're trying to capture a sound and record it on a device. What do you think of that?
I think that sounds good.
Nice. Yeah. Solid. What's the part that seems the most mystical and magical to you out of all of those things? Or like the most unknown or confusing?
Out of like what you said or what I'm looking at on the board here.
Mostly about what I said, I guess. And we could talk about some of the pictures I drew. I guess you're looking at the condenser and the dynamic mic recording there.
Um, so I mean, I have a pretty good concept of like the sound itself. It's mainly from microphone to computer that I don't know much about.
Okay. Yeah. How it gets from, how that sound is captured on a microphone and ends up on your computer. That part's the more confusing part. Okay. Gotcha. Um, well, nice. Well, we could spend a little more time diving into that part in this episode. And I'll talk about how sound waves work, and you can kind of chime in with some of your understanding, and we can kind of save some of the uh, the detail for your next episode. Um, so yeah, so if you go to the picture on the bottom right, or the pictures on the bottom right with the tuning forks and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
we can look at that. Um, does this look familiar in like your lessons you taught on sound physics?
Um, Somewhat. I do remember, um, like in physics, we had like two different tuning forks, and we'd like hit one, and then we'd stop it, and then the other one was going
Yeah.
because it's like resonant frequency and stuff.
Right. Okay.
It's
Yeah.
pretty cool.
That's a great that's a great thing to bring up. And I'd say like and you can get that even with like a well tuned and quality like piano where you play one note, you stop it all together and you like I don't know, you make it so that string stops vibrating altogether basically, and then
Hmm.
some resonant notes farther up the keyboard or the piano are still ringing that you can hear, you know?
Yeah,
It's that
and
same type of idea.
I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent, but
Yeah.
I want to remember this for my topic.
Yeah, sure.
But even when you're just like playing music, it can happen when you're alone. But when you're like playing with a group, like you could have like two people playing, like parts of like a harmony, and then
Mhm.
if the tuning's right, then you can hear kind of like a secret tone that isn't actually being played, but it's just the way the sound waves are like
Mm.
happening. That it's called the overtone series. There's overtones and undertones
Mhm.
um, that can happen outside of like just the note that you are playing.
Wow. Yeah.
It's pretty cool,
That
but
sounds pretty cool. I think we'll have to dive into that on an episode cuz I don't even understand that, to be honest. I don't have any framework for understanding what you just said.
yeah,
Exactly. Like I get the gist, but I don't know where that sound is coming from, you know. That extra tone.
yeah. I'll probably cover that in a future topic, but we can get back to recording overview.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. So, I mean, tuning forks are a good way to think about it because a tuning fork, when you vibrate it, the tines of the fork are like physically moving, right?
Hmm.
So they're physically vibrating back and forth. As they're doing that, they're hitting the air particles next to them and pushing them, or kind of sucking them back as it's moving back. So, yeah, do you kind
So,
of get
so
the
I was gonna
picture?
say, it's kind of like how I'm picturing it is like if you have a spoon kind of like on top of water, and you like press it down, and the water kind of gets like sucked down with it,
Yeah, so
and
you
then
push the water down kind of,
yeah, and then
and
the water is like, oh, got to fill that space, kind of, and it
yeah.
gets like sucked down. Or like I did this with my tea. I had like an ice cube sitting on my spoon,
Hmm.
and I pressed it down, and I mean, like it was on top of the spoon, so you would think that it would just stay there, but it got sucked down with the spoon.
Oh,
Is kind of how I'm thinking about this.
yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, you could think of it like that, of kind of like, as it moves back, the air is going to try to fill that space anyways, kind of like the water would try to fill the space as you put your spoon under.
Hmm.
So you could think of it that way. Or like if you push your spoon down, you're displacing the water or down, and then when you pull it back up, the water is coming back to fill that space. You can, however kind of helps you conceptualize it, visualize it. You can also, you don't have to picture a tuning fork. Tuning forks are kind of weird and alien looking. You could picture a speaker, and I think a lot of people have seen like a big subwoofer, or like maybe on like the end
Hmm.
of your JBL speaker, there's this thing that boom, like moves out and back and forth that you can see, like you can see it physically moving. Um,
Yeah.
and that's doing the same thing. It's pushing molecules and then coming back to pull molecules back. Um, but what this basically does is it creates pockets of compression, and what are called rarefactions. Um,
Rarefactions.
Rarefactions, my bad.
No, you're good.
How embarrassing. Basically, these compressions are parts where there's a bunch of air molecules more closely packed together, and then the rarefactions are, areas where there's not as much air molecules. It's like more spread out. So, in other words, high pressure versus low pressure. So
Hmm.
that's really the difference. And that's kind of the that's kind of how sound is propagating, and all the while, all of the molecules that are helping to propagate this sound wave are just moving back and forth, kind of bumping into the particles next to them, displacing them, moving them back and forth. Um, and they call it a longitudinal wave for that reason, rather than like kind of uh, rather than kind of like a wave that you'd picture like a classic sine wave,
Hmm.
which we often kind of think of music or sound as, because that's kind of how it looks once we see it on a computer, um, or if we look at it like a simplified version of like a harmonic or something.
Hmm.
So really, and I think you can see on the image there on the bottom, how these increases and decreases in pressures kind of map to the peaks and the valleys, or the peaks and the troughs, um, on a sine wave. So they still kind of have that
Hmm.
sinusoidal relationship, but it's not physically a sine. It's not, there's a sound moving up and down as it's getting closer to your head. It's not exactly like that, but that's a way that you can kind of mathematically show, where the value is as time goes on. Yeah.
Nice.
So yeah. Any confusing, any weird parts about that?
I don't think so. I think that at least for me, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Solid. And you have some background understanding of this, of course. I'm sure you've
Hmm.
thought about sound maybe a lot, maybe more than the average person has.
Yeah,
um,
probably.
so yeah, fair enough. Yeah. So I guess you might be thinking, well, let's go on to talking about the microphone now. So you have this understanding of what a speaker does. So take
Hmm.
that. So now you can also, take the fact that to power a speaker, you use electricity. You're sending electrical signals through to make. the we'll call it a diaphragm too, because it's basically it's kind of the same thing, but make the diaphragm of the speaker vibrate back and forth. So you're basically doing the opposite with a microphone. So you have
Mm-hmm.
a diaphragm that is really sensitive and it's moving with those sound waves that have been pumped out by your speaker or by your voice or by your instrument. So it's moving with those sound waves.
Yeah.
Um, so basically, like literally, the air pressure and these particles of like high pressure um, air particle pockets and low pressure pockets, like they're literally pushing and pulling this diaphragm of the microphone back and forth. Um, and that is then can then be that can be converted to an electrical signal by what's called like a transducer. There's all sorts of transducers. So there's temperature transducers, there's force transducers. Trying to think of other things in the world. You, you might even say there's like visual transducers. I don't really know. Um, but basically, that's something that measures some physical value and turns it into like an electric um, analog, so to speak. And it's literally an analog signal. So it's still as continuous as the sound waves themselves. It hasn't been like dumbed down or simplified by digital
Mm-hmm.
processing yet. Um, so does that part kind of make sense?
Yeah. So I see like the two. It looks like two different kinds of microphones.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's one plugged into a box.
Yeah.
So is that the transducer?
Mm. So are you saying is the box the transducer?
Yeah.
In this case, um, it aids in the process in that it provides power and it helps um, like capture that analog signal in a way that it can then be converted to digital. Um, but yeah, basically the what you'd kind of get out of the differences in those pictures is so one of them is like I have a picture of like a USB mic, and in those they have the transducer and the digital conversion all housed within that microphone. So you're not
Mm-hmm.
sending just like electric sine waves per se to your computer, but from your USB mic, you're sending um, excuse me, a signal that has been converted to digital already to your computer. And we'll talk about what that means soon, so you don't get too confused about that part. But in the second picture, we have what's called a dynamic microphone, um, and also some XLR microphones can still be a condenser mic, and can still kind of be captured and used in the same way that like a dynamic mic's being used here, where there's no digital components inside the microphone. It's just capturing an analog electrical signal uh, using an audio interface, which is the box in that picture.
So what's the difference between condenser and dynamic?
Um, so I think that's something we'll dive into on another episode because there's condenser mics, dynamic mics, and ribbon mics. These are the three main types of mics. There might be other ones. So talking about the difference there would be pretty good, but generally a condenser, you could say a condenser mic um, uses a more like active electric force um, to help get like a higher fidelity, stronger signal. Um, So it uses an electrical source to make it so it can pick up more sound, whereas a dynamic mic is solely relying on like um, the vibrations in the air to push um, to make that electrical signal kind of happen.
Okay.
I don't know. So you could think of like I wouldn't say that's a super precise definition, but you could think of it as like a condenser has kind of like a active power and a dynamic is kind of a passive way of recording.
Mm-hmm. Like there's not real power like going into the microphone. It's more of just taking in the vibrations and converting it to electricity.
Yeah.
And then the electricity converts in the little box
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
to discrete numbers.
Yeah. So sometimes you'll get, oh yeah, let's talk about that. So yeah. So looking at it either with like a dynamic or XLR mic going to an audio interface, or with a USB mic that has the converter with inside of it. Um, with either of those situations, you can there's a conversion happening where basically it is sampling that analog signal that once again we said is just as continuous as the sound signal itself. So it's pretty representative of it. So it's sampling it, and by that I mean it's going like it might say every um, 256 times within a second we're going to record a value or whatever. So like every um I don't know, every fraction of a second we're going to record what value that analog electrical signal is at. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
you can picture that sine wave, and that electrical signal is going to look like a sine wave at this point. Um yeah. So you can picture that sine wave, and we even have, yeah, let me draw a picture of a sine wave even. Um So, whoop, doop. So you got your sine wave. I drew it over to the right. Um, and it's going to take different points along that wave and measure them, see where they're at, see what that amplitude is.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll happen on like a regular interval. So it might be like um, it could be every second, although you'd probably not get a very good signal if you did that. Or it could be like 200 times a second that it reads what that value is at and just saves it as a number. So it says this amplitude is 10 or this amplitude is like 3. It's obviously um, it's more than likely going to be a bigger number range than just using like 10, 3, and 1.
Mm-hmm.
But you might have a range and it'll kind of map something to like um, maybe you have like 3,000 to 0 digital values, and 1,500 is just like ground zero or something. And so then um, maybe your maximum analog thing is like 5 volts or something. And so then your 5 volts maps to that 3,000, and your 0 volts maps to that 0. Um, and you know your 3 is around the 1,500 on that digital scale there. And then all of those numbers kind of in between represent the like the various what's the word? So like the various kind of decimals that you could get of like 2.45 or 4.79, or and it might not even be, it might even be more high fidelity than that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what these are getting at, and I guess how they're kind of talked about on your computer system, is sampling rate and bit depth. So bit depth is like how many numbers are you using to characterize this analog signal? So like how many numbers are you using to map to the amplitude of this analog electrical signal? And your sampling rate is like how many times per second. It's usually in hertz, which is something per second. So, like, how many times per second are we taking samples of the signal? Okay, so we covered a lot just then. Can you kind of summarize back in your own words, like the end-to-end process uh, that we just talked about, from getting it from a sound signal to your computer, or we just go with getting it from the microphone, sound to microphone, to the digital conversion to the computer, I guess.
So essentially, my comprehension of this is
Mm-hmm.
the sound waves, depending on the microphone, I'll just use condenser for the sake of the, um, the whole argument or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially, the sound, um, like vibrates, the, uh, what is it, the force transistor or something in the microphone.
So,
Is that the right term?
so the part people will call it the diaphragm.
Okay. I'll just call it the diaphragm.
But you can also say that it is a force transducer to get a
Transducer.
force to an electrical signal, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, essentially the sound vibrates or like interacts with the diaphragm, which like creates the kind of like current, like the electrical current, running it to the um, the box, which is also a transducer.
Hmm.
Or is that just a
I would say it's something else. I'd say it's a converter, an analog to digital converter.
okay,
Yeah.
I'll call it that. So it gets into the box and then it converts the electrical currents into the like the numbers or codes or whatever you want to call it, to put it onto the computer. And then the computer records those like electrical or like the numbers slash codes as like, converts it to like whatever like program or whatever you're using to record, is essentially what I got from that.
Yeah. Yeah. It saves them as discrete numbers in sequence, pretty much, that represent the amplitude of that signal.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess an important thing that that I'd point out that's kind of directly applicable to somebody who wants to record sound and especially wants to make sure they have a high quality recording is that with bit depth and with sampling rate, which again, sampling rate is how frequently are we taking samples, bit depth is what is like the fidelity, or like how small are we breaking down the amplitude of these signals into. So an important part of that kind of directly applies is the higher bit depth you have, the higher fidelity of sound you'll have. Um, and with sampling rate, the higher sampling rate you have, that'll also help create a higher fidelity sound. But the trade-off is when you have your computer taking more and more data points, it can, well, it's more data, so it's taking up more space, and also it requires more processing. So you might get increased latency, which is basically um, um, so it's basically like a delay from where you speak to where you hear back um, uh, your like the sound that you made. So if you're wanting to record something with effects on it and know what those effects are going to sound like, um, then um, then that might be slowed down by the sampling rate you choose and the bit depth.
Okay.
Yeah,
So for those people out there that don't know what like low versus high fidelity means and also bit depth, can you explain that like in like a short definition for them?
yeah, yeah. Bit depth, I'd say, is less important um, than the sampling rate. Um, but yeah, basically, bit depth is just like how. So like So if you think of it this way, we're talking about amplitudes, right? So like it's so you can kind of think of um, louder sounds versus quieter sounds, and I could have a bit depth of 2, and all my sounds are going to sound like bah or like bah, you know, like a louder sound or a quieter sound. Not necessarily talking about the pitch there, or I
Mm-hmm.
could have a bit depth of like 3,000, and then I have sounds that are like ah, 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 just louder and louder, making some weird noises here. But like you have a wide range of, it could be a loud sound or it can be like a quieter sound, and so basically the higher bit depth you go, the more true you are to the original sound that you're recording. That's how I'd put that. Um, and what was the other part you wanted me to summarize?
Um, Fidelity.
Yeah. So fidelity, and you could think of like the word fidelity kind of means faithfulness, or faith. So you could think of like um, how faithful your recorded sound is to the original sound that you um, made. So that's a good way to think about it. Um, so how much is it going to sound like you're in the room with the person singing that note or playing that note on the guitar or whatever instrument, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And um, yeah, and fidelity of a recording, there's trade offs in being able to have a high fidelity recording uh, versus, the space that it takes and the speed that it takes to record and process the sound. But generally, having a high fidelity recordings with sound isn't going to take up as much space or a ton of space in the scheme of things as like video would. Like video takes tons of space. So space isn't something I guess I would worry as much about in your sound recordings. Um,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, okay. So yeah, so I don't know. So what are some areas of confusion, or what are some? I don't know. I guess what are some areas that would be better clarified? And then we can go into kind of towards the end talking about um, an interesting kind of question and answer that you might have about how this works, and talk a little bit more about um, how the sound is actually saved on a lot of computers um, in a way that you can then manipulate it later. Um, yeah,
I don't think I have any questions about anything that we have talked about so far.
Mhm.
So we could probably move on to the next thing.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that sounds good. Um, Yeah, why don't we talk about this? It's kind of fun Q&A. So you might ask, if you have a microphone that has like a single diaphragm that vibrates back and forth, how do you
Mm-hmm.
record more than one sound if it can only if you only have one diaphragm and it vibrates back and forth? How are you picking up um say if it's a room mic, how are you picking up the sound of the drums and the sound of kind of the singer and any of the other ambient noise? How are we picking up so many things at once? Or even how are we picking up like the really low frequency sounds and the really high frequency sounds at the same time? So I'll let you puzzle this
Um,
over in real quick.
are you saying like what kind of microphone you would use? Um,
I guess I'm thinking more of like, how does this work conceptually? Like you only have one diaphragm for this microphone, but it's still able to pick up all these different sounds at all these different frequencies. So you would think like what's happening? Is the diaphragm just like moving around like crazy trying to match the high frequency and the low frequency sounds? Or like I guess what do you think?
um, oh gosh, bro.
It's okay. It's not the most obvious thing.
Um, I mean, my best guess would probably be like, um, you can set like a range that you're listening for, or that the microphone is quote unquote listening for. Um, and so it is like choosing to pick up those specific things.
Okay. Yeah.
But that's my that's my answer, I guess.
Yeah. That is what you say is true. Um yeah, you can set the range. You can make filters, use filters to filter out the high frequencies or filter out the low frequencies so you only get certain sounds. So that is something you can do. Um but more specifically, um I guess the sciencey explanation of how a microphone can pick up all these different sounds, and even how like our human ears could pick up so many different sounds all at the same time,
They have
is
hairs.
is that microphone has hair? No, oh my gosh, is the idea of like sound summation, or
Hmm.
or you can think of any sort of sine wave like summation. Um, so we got the word sum in summation, which means that we're adding things together, basically. So, yeah, one of the pictures I have on the board, I have some square waves. Um, and so I have two identical square waves that they kind of oscillate back and forth, going up to +1 and down to -1, um, as time goes on. So if you were to like add these signals together, they then add to a bigger, kind of a bigger square wave that goes up to +2 on its peaks and down to -2. So basically, sound waves can stack together, and this is kind of the best visual way to think about it. But with the pockets of pressure in depressurized areas, that is actually what like a sound wave is like. You could probably think of it as like, um, now you have even greater pressure in these areas. Um, yeah, and lower pressure in some of these areas if you were to add those signals together, or basically play the same signal twice where they meet at the same point on your microphone.
Okay.
Like play the signal out of two different sources, the sound signal. Um, and the interesting thing is this also kind of works in reverse, where if you have two signals that are the opposite of each other, they then cancel each other. So you can see the other graph that I made there, where there's two signals, and they're basically the flip of each other. Of like if you took the x-axis and kind of just mirrored one signal, you'd get the other signal. And when they add up, they cancel each other because when one of them has low pressure areas, the other one has high pressure areas, and vice versa, and that just makes it cancel out. And that's how you get noise canceling headphones. It
Mm-hmm.
quickly records or like reads the sound and sends it to your ears the opposite uh, sound of what you're hearing and cancels it by the time the other sound gets to your ears.
Okay.
Yeah. So the other thing is when you have more complex signals, like high frequency stuff and low frequency stuff, they can add together to make some really weird looking wave.
Mm.
That can then the diaphragm can still mimic, or that might look like there's some big pressure zones, uh, and then there's some like smaller thin slices of pressure zones, and those kind of add together in the right way that the mic can still move around with those pressure zones and as pressure is being applied to it, and lack of pressure is pulling it back and so forth.
Okay.
So that was just a fun thing to think about, but like you don't need to know that if you're just looking to record your next your next um, dope hit.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then I guess the last thing I'd add is in a lot of recording software on your computers, um, it'll visually represent your sound signal as what are called stems. Um, and it's basically you have your kind of your axis, your horizontal axis of time, and then you have these stems that are basically it looks like a line going up with a little circle on the end. Think of like a little lollipop or something. And they either
Mm-hmm.
go up or they go down, and they go different varying levels of up and down, and they represent the amplitude of your signal at that time. And if you zoom in really close on an audio signal in Audacity and other programs, you can actually see these stems and edit them one at a time, moving that amplitude for
Mm-hmm.
that like fraction of a second, move it up or move it down or fix it, which is a really cool thing to look at and kind of see the basic element of the sound wave and uh, as it appears on your computer now that you've recorded it.
Yeah.
So very technical kind of overview, but um, yeah, hopefully it helps you and other people to understand what's happening in a way that can help you um, understand, how best to capture signals for your situation and for your um, for what type of project you're trying to do. Like if you have like a computer that's kind of pretty weak computational power, maybe you have to kind of rely on having a lower sample rate so it can handle recording even, or like so that you can hear back live effects um, on your audio track as you're recording it, so you know a little bit of what it'll sound like when you have the reverb on it and you have a little compression on it, or like auto tune or some other cool effect. um, but then again, also those effects can add latency of when it hits your ear, like if it's too um, kind of computationally expensive of an effect. But yeah, So that's kind of the overview, and I think pretty soon I'll talk about DAWs as well, or digital audio workstations, because that's really kind of the next big piece that you need to start being able to record is the software that you actually use to record. Once you've have and understand the recording instruments like the microphone and the audio interface, or just whatever setup you have there. And then we also have your look on sound physics to look forward to, coming very soon. But yeah, any yeah, any points to clarify? Any parts that um, I don't know, kind of tickled your brain that you don't know what to think of,
No, I think I
or
have
other
a lot better
thoughts?
understanding about like how that stuff works, like with the different microphones and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I don't think I have really any questions though.
Okay. Yeah.
I think it was pretty informative.
Yeah, that's good. And I hope we cover this in a way that like most people will be able to. I hope we kind of danced around each of the ideas enough that people can kind of put together the picture of how it works. Um, but yeah, so in summary, you got sound waves. They cause positive and negative pressure pockets, and these pockets either push or pull the diaphragm of your microphone, and that movement is turned into an electrical analog signal. So something like a sine wave, or it might look a lot more wonky than a sine wave, of course. Um, that is then read however often as number values in your digital converter, which might be an audio interface or it might be part of your USB microphone. And the digital signal is sent to your computer, and those numbers are saved and represented as stems that show the amplitude and where each of these samplings sit in relation to each other across time on your track. So that's kind of the overview. Yeah, kind of technical. Um, that's the summary, anyways. But I think that's about all I got. And some of these topics we'll bring up in future episodes and talk more in depth about, like the microphone types. That'll be one that's probably coming soon. So you can kind of know what type of mic is right for you for your recording situation. Benji's going to go more into depth about the physics of sound and maybe understanding not just how sound moves, but like how notes and sounds that sound good to us, um, how their resonation throughout space makes them appealing to hear. um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I don't know, cool stuff moving forward. Uh, any closing thoughts, Benji?
Um, check out the website, Instagram, Twitter. Whether you're watching this on YouTube or Spotify, follow everything, like everything, love everything. Support us. It helps. We have no support yet, but I trust that you guys will deliver.
Yeah. So, yeah, check us out, or subscribe, follow on whatever platform you want. If you want
And turn on
more.
notifications so you know when we post. And we can cut this later, but as of right now, we plan on doing one episode, releasing every Monday.
That's right. Yep. So that's the
So
plan.
stay updated.
Yeah. So yep, if you're really interested in more of these, like understanding these topics, um, and I mean we'll get into more practical, more practical discussion points that like you might actually use as a person who's trying to record their first song or mix their music so it sounds good or sounds okay, and like or like a person who's you know um, trying to learn some of the ideas of music theory and like rhythm, uh, notes, chords, just everything music theory. um, Having a second stream of or a second kind of view on how those work. Like this is this is kind of the type of things that we want to bring to you moving forward. So if you're interested in that, uh, follow. But
Yeah.
I think that's about all I got. So in this case, I will see ya.
Boy, peace.